Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 22nd of January, 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today is Charles Malet. Welcome to the programme, Charles.
Thank you, Mike.
We're hoping to have Vanessa on a little bit later, but we're still having technical problems with between here and Lebanon. But we're going to get started off with the Trump inauguration, of course. So President Trump has now been president again for 2 days. And the question is, how's that going? Immigration, climate change, gender, and exiting the World Health Organization appeared to be the cover for some perhaps less exciting policies and executive orders. And I'm delighted to say that joining me today to discuss the first 48 hours of the new Trump presidency is Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the program, Patrick.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Great to be with you.
So what are your thoughts on what happened on Monday then? Obviously, a lot of executive orders signed on that day. Is that normal?
For the first day, it's not. It's definitely, he's way ahead of any previous presidents for the number of executive orders signed on the first day after being sworn in. So he's like way ahead of all previous presidents. So there's been quite a few executive actions and executive orders, and some really significant ones. So hugely impactful, and he's made good on a lot of his campaign promises. And I think he's off to a good start with his base, especially with pardoning the January 6th people. A lot of people regard as political prisoners, 1,500 or so. That's huge. The anti-censorship executive order, immediately putting pressure on big tech, and all the other ones you mentioned, including the potentially revoking the security clearance of the 51 intelligence officers that helped to float out the hoax that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation that helped Biden win the 2020 election. So if these are any indication to go by, there'll be perhaps some of these issues will be revisited in the first year of his administration. We'll see.
Yes. Now, on the immigration front, he's mentioned calling it a national emergency. He's talking about closing the border. He's talking about birthright citizenship, which we'll come on to in a minute. He's bringing back what he's describing as the Remain in Mexico policy. And the other thing was the death penalty for people that commit crimes, for immigrants that commit crimes on U.S. soil. So these, I presume, would be perceived by many as being extremely popular moves. My question to you, though, is, do you think, is this treating a symptom? Is he pushing the problem south of the border? It will not disappear as a problem. He's not, on the surface at least, doing anything to address the cause of the migration in the first place. And so my question would be, will this energize the people trafficking networks, and will this turn into sort of similar to the war on drugs, really something that never really goes away?
Well, this is a difficult issue. I mean, in the short term, I think this is a knock against the drug and the human trafficking cartels. Because what the Democrats did was create a demand, because the policy was such that it was quite obvious that there was kind of an open border, kind of automatic asylum process that was the Democrats were basically running. And so the cartels used that as a green light to start organizing caravans. And the whole thing was kind of systematized, almost like a business. And the numbers don't lie in terms of the amount of people flowing across the southern border. And so that was the policy for years. And as soon as there was an announcement that the Biden administration and Harris basically throttled immigration the last 4 months because they were taking such a huge battering in the polls on this issue during the 2024 election cycle. So apprehensions and things like that, record highs in the last 4 months under Biden. Deportations, record highs under Biden. So they did already change this policy before Trump was sworn in, and so he's going to continue that. And just the fact that he's in power means that there's going to be a whole lot less people coming through that direction. So in the short term, in the long term, it does mean that you could have more intense warfare, at least on the drug trafficking side. And the president has already declared, or he's going to be trying to push to label the cartels as terrorist organizations. So if that's the case, this isn't the first time this has happened, by the way. During the war on drugs, and the United States got intimately involved in arming their own sort of counter cartel, which became the Zeta cartel. It totally backfired. It's kind of a Mujahideen, Al Qaeda type thing that happened there. And so the Sinaloa and the Zeta cartel, so two major drug trafficking cartels that became so powerful, and their influence stretched even further throughout Central America, not just Mexico or Colombia. So this can create more problems as well, but it's a huge problem. It really depends on how well the U.S. government's able to coordinate with Mexico and the new government there, as well as these other Central American countries. Certainly, they have an ally with Bukele as well in a country like El Salvador. So it's not as if they don't have allies in the region, but we'll see. But on immigration, definitely, it's short-term, huge throttling of the migrant flows.
And on the issue of these citizenship orders, I mean, this is supposed to stop people that have immigrated in, or immigrants into the United States from giving birth to children and they automatically getting U.S. citizenship and so on. We've got the New York Times here. You sent me this article earlier on saying that 22 states are now suing to stop Trump's birthright citizenship order. What are your thoughts on that? Are there any prospect of success?
Yeah, I think some of these will. I mean, it's going to go through the legal process. So the birthright citizen or anchor baby issue, as well as death penalty for immigrants who are committing certain types of crimes in the U.S. These are all going to be challenged at the constitutional level. So for the activist jurists, and for this is money that's bleeding out of the left and the Democratic side that would normally go towards the next midterms. They'll be fighting these issues in the courts. So that's, from a financial point of view, all the Soros money that's going to be paying for a lot of these legal challenges, that's money that could be allocated for the Democrats' ground game or to do other things to get back into power. So, again, huge advantage from Trump and the new kind of MAGA Republican party by putting their opposition on the back heel on this issue. So you'll see a lot of this really extreme positions by Donald Trump, knowing that these are going to get challenged in the courts. And the Republicans will just turn around and say, hey, elections have consequences. And they'll let this thing play out in the same way that the Democrats, the shoe is on the other foot, and the Democrats are putting the same type of extreme pressure, forcing the right and conservative groups to fight these issues for years in the courts. Now the tables have been turned. So that's very interesting.
Yes, indeed. Now, two other policies which may be unsurprising in some ways, but others getting very, very excited about it. Of course, the climate and the removal of the United States from the Paris Accords, but also drill, baby, drill, because that's what he was saying on Monday. And the World Health Organization, two pretty massive announcements.
Yeah, well, we knew the Paris climate accords were going to get pulled because that's kind of what Trump did in his first term. And he promised that on the campaign trail. And there's no reason to believe that he wouldn't go through with it, especially after, removing WHO funding, pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords. So he's basically killed the Green New Deal again. So, but this is a really devastating knockback for Davos and the World Economic Forum, for the green agenda in general. So, and also he's, removing the EV electric vehicle mandate at the federal level. It's as Tesla's stock prices been struggling over the last 48 hours. You go look at the ups and downs in the Tesla. Certainly that's a reaction to Trump's speech at the inauguration. Certainly not good for Elon Musk, ironically. But it's really kind of bringing energy policy and bringing economic policy a little bit back to reality. And certainly this has created tremors. And you're going to see it will take a delayed reaction, but you'll see a delayed reaction from this in the UK and in Europe. And all of a sudden, these green policies are no longer sacrosanct and no longer in vogue eventually. And then you'll start to see people questioning at government levels in EU member states, political leaders and so forth, questioning the wisdom of these of energy policy. And who knows where that's going to end. It will eventually probably end up on the foreign policy debate vis-a-vis Russian gas, for instance. So it's going to be a battle. At the same time, the U.S. is going to want to keep enforcing, energy policy in Europe and stuff like that. But for the UK, think of all the draconian measures, the attack on the combustion engine, and all of these things. Now people might get a little inspiration from across the pond. Discussion could change.
Are we going to see Greta back?
No, Greta's busy with the Palestinian issue. She found a real issue. So I'm very inspired by Greta 2.0 in that respect. She's found a real issue. She seems to be really into it, and she's actually getting arrested for real, as opposed to sort of the stage arrests when she was doing climate activism. So I think this is a great result. The evolution of Greta Thunberg is fantastic.
Yeah. The other big announcement, pretty much as we'll see later in the program, parallel to what's been announced in the UK as well, is Stargate, as it's been described, $500 billion. OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank involved in it. So an initial investment of $100 billion. And then over the next 4 or 5 years, that's going to increase to $500 billion. Larry Ellison unveiled his plan. Well, we'll come on to we'll show a little bit of what Larry Ellison said on Monday. Let's have a look at this.
Once we gene sequence that cancer tumor, you can then vaccinate the person, design a vaccine for every individual person to vaccinate them against that cancer. And you can make that vaccine, that mRNA vaccine, you can make that robotically, again using AI, in about 48 hours. So imagine early cancer detection, the development of a cancer vaccine for your particular cancer aimed at you, and have that vaccine available in 48 hours. This is the promise of AI and the promise of the future.
Now, again, this issue of personalized treatment has been something that Debbie has been talking about for 2 years now. We've been pushing this extremely hard, that this is what is coming. But Ellison, talking about artificial intelligence-driven cancer vaccine system, this is part and parcel, has been wrapped up in amongst this Stargate system. But they're talking about, just as we are in the United Kingdom, they're talking about Patrick building data centers, this time in Texas, and huge AI infrastructure that goes alongside that. What are your thoughts?
Well, firstly, I can't imagine with all the money and power Larry Ellison has that he couldn't find a decent plastic surgeon. He's had so much work done. But put that aside for the moment. The science behind mRNA is just absolute crackpot science. It's not it hasn't been proven to be effective and work at all. They've waived all of these sort of prerequisites in terms of testing and showing that its efficacy because of COVID. So they've unleashed this supposed miracle tech, but clinically and in reality, it's vaporware. mRNA technology is vaporware, and it's been driven by COVID. It's made many billionaires have been created through its unleashing onto the population, but it's ridiculous. And to the idea that you can vaccinate for cancer is insane. And it's funny that this is coming at a time when there's all sorts of really effective alternative cancer therapies, including metabolic therapy, that doesn't cost anything, but doesn't have any ROI, return on investment, in terms of intellectual property. But that's where that's the leading edge of cancer research. And so where's Larry Ellison on that? Well, there's no money to be made on that. So I don't know. In terms of the AI issue, this is one of those, great big tech oligarchs that sits at that top committee with the other, tech bros, as they call them, and in the biotech sphere as well. Bill Gates and others, and they have their own agenda because they've sunk so much money and capital into some of these technologies and companies, and they want to see a return on investment. And they're going out in the public and making their case and really hyping some of this stuff. But on the back end, and even if it worked, in America, who would have access to it? Only the top payers as well. So, but that's even if you can prove that this stuff even works at all. But it doesn't, just to go IPO, you don't need what Moderna proved and what BioNTech have proven and all these other companies is that now potentially you can go IPO without even having to prove that the thing works. So that's just like the .com boom in that sense. So
Yes.
Total fraud, total scam. That's how I look at it. I'm very skeptical, and of course, I'll be hated for it by some people. But there you go.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. There is they have their own policy agenda behind this, and I just want to play a short clip from Larry Ellison from September 2024. This is at the Oracle Financial Analyst meeting. Let's just listen to what he has to say about here.
The police will be on their best behavior because we're constantly watching and recording everything that's going on. Citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on. And it's unimpeachable. The cars have cameras on them. I think we have a squad car here someplace. But those kind of applications using AI, if we can use AI, and we're using AI to monitor the video. So if that altercation that occurred in Memphis, the chief of police would be immediately notified. It's not people that are looking at those cameras, it's AI that's looking at the camera. No, you can't do this. It would be like a shooting. That's going to be an event that's immediately, an alarm is going to go off, it's going to be, and we're going to
I'm not sure that he knows what they're going to do, but anyway, is that not technocracy right there, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, this is important for people to understand. The technocrat believes that they identify the problem, and they then assemble the experts. They are the experts, and their buddies are the experts, and then they provide us with a solution. So they control that whole process from beginning to end. And the idea is that they can make every aspect of life and society convenient through AI and digital processes. And so that's the promise of the big tech oligarchy. And they want to accelerate this process. And it's all about acceleration. And it's now, you can see this with the statements and have this coterie surrounding Donald Trump at the inauguration. And a lot of the statements that he's made regarding technology and so forth, that we're going to be full steam ahead on AI and all these various applications. And it's about accelerate, remove regulations, deregulate. Elon Musk is put himself embedded inside government, who he'll have privy to, government budgets and spending as well. And I'm sure he and Alex Karp from Palantir and Mark Zuckerberg from Meta and Jeff Bezos had a front row seat as well with AWS, Amazon Web Servers, big data centers, that they're going to divide up the pie of federal money amongst themselves, and also the defense industry, Palmer Luckey as well, building an empire in Ohio for drone and U.S. fighter manufacturing and so forth. So this is Silicon Valley moving into defense, moving into NSA, surveillance, law enforcement, and so forth. They're promising that all of this is going to be easier and more convenient and cheaper, but let us do this transition, remove all regulations. And it's a full merger of government and corporate interests. And who warned us about that, or who coined that term 80 years ago? But Benito Mussolini, the definition of fascism as corporativism. So this technocracy is interchangeable with fascism, and technocrats tend to be fascists in terms of their, problem solving. Everything's a problem. Elon Musk, this is a problem that we got to solve. Larry Ellison, we're going to solve this problem. We've got the technology over here. And by the way, there's a big fat government contract attached to that. UK they're going to be on board with this because obviously all surveillance is pioneered in the UK. So they're going to have a big part of this as well as Europe. So that's what's happening in the West. So a big wealth transfer as well into this sector.
Patrick, just to go back to migration for a little bit and its relationship with food security, there's a campaign about the prevalence of undocumented workers working in agriculture, effectively keeping the system afloat. To what extent do you think the population are aware that their food is only the price it is because of undocumented workers? And also, given that the big food industry is reliant upon them, how do you see that panning out?
People are very aware of that, especially in the western states, because California, the San Joaquin Valley, it's the breadbasket, of the United States. Agriculturally, it's regarded as such. Not so much the Midwest. That's more grains, barley, beef, livestock, and so forth, and corn. But when you get to the western states and San Joaquin Valley, you have all of those products, and it's well known there's a huge migrant workforce that will seasonally come into the United States or permanently come in and work seasonally. And so it's no surprise there. And in terms of the, tightening up immigration, what Donald Trump's talking about, this isn't going to be migrant ag workers or hotel workers or, chambermaids or, waitresses and things like that. No, he's been very specific about it, definitely focusing on the criminal aspect, or wanting kind of no reprobates in the United States and so forth. But in terms of food prices, I mean, the issue in California is water and water supplies, available water supplies, and so if California is going to become a breadbasket for America again, and there's going to be less imports from Chile or Brazil or Argentina or Guatemala or Honduras and so forth, in Mexico even, that means that they have to solve a lot of these problems. But I think that it's kind of a fact of life for America and Europe and the UK that the global South is going to be providing substantial amounts of, because we're so used to eating things year round. We don't eat everything's available in the supermarket. Right now, broccoli is from Kenya, but in 2 months it's going to be from somewhere else. So that's just life in the West.
Mm-hmm. It is indeed.
Right. Okay. Right, Pat. Let's move on to one other major area, and that is the question of war. Now, Trump, if we go back, I think it was July or something, this article in AP, Trump says he can end the Russia-Ukraine war in one day. Russia's UN ambassador says he can't. Clearly, he is now asked for discussions to begin officially with Russia and China, but taking Russia first. What do you think the prospects are there? Is he going to do what he says and end the Ukraine war or not?
Well, that's interesting. We recently translated a piece by Nikolai Patrushev, who's on the Russian National Security Council. Basically, he's Putin's Jake Sullivan, and they're basically saying, this is what Moscow's saying. No, you're not going to be able to end it in 24 hours. I think that's really rhetoric, wishful thinking on the part of Trump, because the U.S. don't hold any cards in Ukraine. The only cards that the U.S. hold or NATO holds is the ability to antagonize or disrupt the situation by launching forays into the Kursk region, or attacking targets in Russian territory, sending Storm Shadow scalp missiles in there. So only to disrupt, to antagonize, to kind of radicalize the situation there. But the Russians been very clear. And so we know that what the timeline is going to be. Russia said they will not have any binding negotiations with Ukraine until there's elections. They're not going to sign anything with Zelensky because they don't believe that he's going to be president of much longer or indefinitely, and they don't trust him because he's basically reneged and gone back on pretty much everything from when he campaigned as president till now. And they had an agreement in Istanbul, and of course Zelensky agreed on it, and then Boris Johnson twisted his arm a little bit, and that was that. So when is that election day going to come? You'll know this is serious when you start hearing someone from the Trump camp mentioning election timetable. Is that going to be in June? Is it going to be in September? And then it's serious. Until that time, there's no way that they might be able to get a ceasefire. They might be able to get a pause or a freeze, but that's not going to be, it's not going to stop. Is that going to be like, is Ukraine going to stop doing what they're doing? They might just continue with the old formula and to try to delay the situation. And I think the U.S. providing arms and aid to Ukraine for a while longer and keeping NATO on the same program, that's not a loss for the U.S. or for NATO. So I don't know. Until is there going to be a democratic outcome in what's left of Ukraine? That's the big question. And then who are the front runners for that? The only thing that could upend that is if there was a coup. If there was a coup in Kiev. Now that could change this whole dynamic. Who would be the likely successor in a coup d'etat? It would have to be engineered by the Americans and the British. So who would be it's the British ambassador, the Ukrainian ambassador to Britain, Valery Zaluzhny, who's hanging out in Mayfair at the moment. So he would be the likely successor to Zelensky in an orchestrated coup. The other one would be Alexei Arestovich. He's more of a wild card. He's decamped in America. He's more pro-Russian. So I know who the British would prefer. Definitely Zaluzhny. They're putting him through his paces right now. So he's not in London for nothing. That's the thing. So maybe also to protect him from Nord Stream prosecution, perhaps. So he's not going to be dragged in front of a court in Berlin to be deposed. So anyway, I think Trump, they have their work cut out for them there. They're so on the back heels, America. And Biden has, and what NATO have done, have created such a hole that it's going to take a miracle to dig out of from the U.S. position. It's and there's going to be no ceding of territory. Not going to happen. And unless Trump is going to be threatening World War III, and you're not going to be able to engage with Russia on that type of negotiation style. You're not dealing with Bibi Netanyahu in Moscow. You're dealing with the Russian state and their national security. Their blob is thousands of people in different institutions that form the national security consensus in Russia. It's not Vladimir Putin micromanaging everything. And Russia's decided, and his top aide published this article or this interview recently, which we translated, and he was very clear on that. So I have no reason to doubt what's coming out of Moscow. And so we'll see how serious the U.S. is. And you'll know when they start talking about elections in Washington. Until that time, I don't view it as serious talk yet.
Okay, and we'll just end this segment then with this, because the question of whether the Prince of Darkness is actually going to be the ambassador to the United States or not is still apparently up in the air, because there's certainly noises coming from people around Trump anyway to suggest that they would reject the suggestion that Peter Mandelson becomes the ambassador to the United States. Is that a likely thing? And Starmer saying, "Oh well, I'm going to get an early visit to the U.S. and go and meet Trump," or have they really, shot themselves in the foot with the pretty arrogant abuse that they sent in his direction before the election?
That and the fact that Mandelson's ties to Jeffrey Epstein are a huge liability, and if that gets unleashed on Twitter or on social media as well, I think that's devastating, and that will be really embarrassing. I mean, Keir Starmer's already on the back heels for so many other issues, including issues relating to Epstein. So Mandelson is just, I can't believe that they put him forward with his background and his ties. Not to mention, the fact that Tony Blair still is regarded as one of the most hated figures in British recent history, and Mandelson is very much tied to Tony Blair. So there must be somebody better qualified and less controversial than Peter Mandelson to fill that role. I'm quite frankly shocked that they haven't lined up a better candidate, to be honest.
Yes. Okay. Well, Patrick, thank you very much for that extended segment on Trump. That was fantastic. You're welcome to stay if you'd like to, but if you've got other things to do, that's fine too. So thank you. And well, look, let's move on then to Southport and the issue of the prosecution there and the guilty verdict. Well, the guilty plea actually.
Guilty plea, indeed. Yeah, this goes back to the events from the summer 2024 and the recent trial of Axel Rudakabana. And first of all, we start with a note posted by the Attorney General with echoes of what was happening in the summer as to what people should post on the internet. Of course, many people at that time falling foul of public order and online safety legislation, but the Crown Prosecution Service here confirming that the teenager, Rudakabana, 18 years old, has pleaded guilty to 3 charges of murder, 10 of attempted murder, the production of ricin, and the ownership of what is being described as a terror manual. Now, the response from the Prime Minister has been to use this as a tool with which to extract the maximum political capital and, of course, further justification for censorship and surveillance and the criminalisation of dissent. Now, he spoke yesterday about this, and having fought off calls for an inquiry into child abuse, he is now going to put in motion an inquiry into the events surrounding the murder of 3 young girls in Southport in the summer. This is how he introduced the topic.
The tragedy of the Southport killings must be a line in the sand for Britain. We must make sure the names of those 3 young girls are not associated with the vile perpetrator, but instead with a fundamental change in how Britain protects its citizens and its children. In pursuit of that, we must, of course, ask and answer difficult questions. Questions that should be far-reaching, unburdened by cultural or institutional sensitivities, and driven only by the pursuit of justice. That is what we owe the family.
So whilst he mentions change, what he really means is progressing the narrative that was developed by the previous Conservative administration, in particular the ever-broadening definition of extremism, which, of course, UK Column has covered over the last few months. Now, in reframing people as extremist and thereby causing enormous division and mistrust in society, he's really demonstrating that the administration, his regime, has lost control, and this continued focus on extremism has really just been confected in order to conflate it with terrorism. So, taking the opportunity, he has pushed forward this narrative specifically with regard to terrorism, and here he is explaining exactly how that works out.
Nonetheless, it is now time for those questions. And the first of those is whether this was a terrorist attack. The blunt truth here is that this case is a sign. Britain now faces a new threat. Terrorism has changed. In the past, the predominant threat was highly organised groups with clear political intent, groups like Al-Qaeda. That threat, of course, remains. But now, alongside that, we also see acts of extreme violence perpetrated by loners, misfits, young men in their bedroom, accessing all manner of material online, desperate for notoriety, sometimes inspired by traditional terrorist groups, but fixated on that extreme violence, seemingly for its own sake. Now, it may well be that people like this are harder to spot, but we can't shrug our shoulders and accept that. We can't have a national security system that fails to tackle people who are a danger to our values, our security, our children. We have to be ready to face every threat.
Of course, the reference to our values is something that needs much greater scrutiny, but will not be allowed under these circumstances. And of course, he points towards loners and misfits who are hard to spot. So he goes on to describe what it is he's going to do about this.
And when I look through the details of this case, the extreme nature of the violence, the meticulous plan to attack young children in a place of joy and safety, violence clearly intended to terrorise, then I understand why people wonder what the word terrorism means. And so if the law needs to change to recognise this new and dangerous threat, then we will change it, and quickly. And we will also review our entire counter-extremist system to make sure we have what we need to defeat it. Now, that work is already underway. I've tasked Sir David Anderson Casey, the new Independent Prevent Commissioner, to hold this system to account, to shine a light into its darkest corners, so the British people can have confidence that action will follow words.
This, of course, has nothing to do with holding the system to account, but everything to do with producing new tools with which to clamp down on those that are deemed to be speaking out or doing things that are not meeting the approval of the state. Also worth pointing out, the reworking of the definition of terrorism is a way in which the government may remove itself from the crosshairs. Of course, the UK column talking for well over a year about the very close proximity between the government's actions and the definition of terrorism as given by the Terrorism Act 2000. And this also may well serve to undermine the processes of tax resistance, as demonstrated by people like Chris Coverdale, who've been interviewed for UK column. Now, the way he speaks, it's as though, and this is a consistent theme, he's still in his role as Director of Public Prosecutions, and he lost no time in rewriting history and explaining all the good things he did whilst he was in that job. And this gave him cause to speak about the way in which he was not going to release evidence earlier on for fear of prejudicing the case. In fact, the doubling down on this particular issue has been such that the CPS have produced another statement out today to make exactly that point. Now, that, of course, is tantamount to a barefaced lie, because the production of ricin, which is now down as an offence that has been pled guilty to, should have been immediately obvious, would have been immediately obvious, and details of that were released prior to the trial, but certainly not at the time of arrest. That discrepancy has not been explained satisfactorily at all. Also, in his speech, he has almost suggested that had it not been possible to buy knives on the internet, then this might not have happened. Of course, the push here is to exploit the plight of these families, and in particular the deaths of young children, in order to further the ends and goals of the Online Safety Act 2023, which is due for significant upgrading as a result of this. Also, to push further the Labour policy on knife crime. They've already stated that they intend to halve knife crime, but of course not eliminate it altogether, strangely enough. And also, just on the online theme, the already a suggestion that there might be two-step verification. So we're looking at digital ID, presumably at a bare minimum, but also the use of a webcam with which to verify that you are not, in fact, a child. It's almost as though he has not heard of artificial intelligence. So this is looking very much like a tool for further online safety, and especially, as I say, exploiting the harm to these children. In a sort of oblique reference, he also said, lamenting the state of affairs in the country, that children have stopped going to school and young people have opted out of work or education. He is trying to make the shoe fit by describing loners and misfits, but actually what he's talking about really are the hangover effects of the COVID policy, thereby people turning away from state education and indeed probably being unfit for work, as demonstrated by all the statistics relating to economic inactivity. Now, it referred to, again, also as the failure of Prevent. So we can see the likelihood that there will be far more engagement between Prevent and young people meddling in schools, again, documented by UK Column in a very good interview with Debbie Evans from last year. And he concludes his, ramblings, for want of a better word, by saying that nothing will be off the table in this inquiry, nothing. So we'll wait and see and mark him against that statement. Now, I want to come on to the BBC's part in all of this, because they have taken a role that has been entirely central to developing this narrative, without which it's hard to see that the public would be effectively conditioned to the point of being able to accept what is going to happen and indeed what has happened, because by extraordinary coincidence, there has been a recent release of a BBC documentary into what they're describing as racism within the group Patriotic Alternative, which is described, of course, always by the BBC as being a far-right group. We've spoken about it a lot before on UK Column. They are self-described as being ethno-nationalists, and there has never been any suggestion that there is a link between Patriotic Alternative and terrorism, and yet they now find themselves falling under that same microscope. Mark Collett, the leader of Patriotic Alternative, did make his own recording, which, of course, he counters by saying that he, therefore, has exposed the BBC. But the point to draw out here is that this is being used as a way of calling for Patriotic Alternative, among others, to be prescribed. We'll come on to the context of that. But to quote from the article, they say that the group cannot be banned under current legislation, as they do not advocate terrorism. But Dame Sarah, talking about Dame Sarah Khan, the former UK's counter-extremism commissioner, feels that they are creating a climate conducive to terrorism. Now, this goes back, courtesy of the BBC, to early 2024, when Michael Gove named, again, among others, but Patriotic Alternative, and the article at that time said that the new extremism definition applies to, but does not criminalise, groups promoting an ideology based on violence, hatred, or intolerance. Now, this is rather clear to see what the direction of travel is. But in terms of context, whilst the BBC may indeed have recorded certain remarks of certain people who have an affiliation or an association with Patriotic Alternative, although Mark Collett was very keen to make the point that this was not during formal meetings, and therefore they were not said in public, and therefore did not constitute criminal events. But this is the way Patriotic Alternative have been treated. Now, in the summer, when the Labour councillor Ricky Jones was recorded as saying they are disgusting Nazi fascists and we need to cut their throats and get rid of them all, I don't think anybody suggested that the Labour Party should be prescribed because of his association with it. Now, just as an aside, we had the prescription announced last week of Hizb ut-Tahrir, described as being the right thing to do in the House of Lords for reasons of our national security. Now, this was on the specific grounds of their anti-Semitism as a group. Now, into the realms of hypocrisy we go, because the prescription of Al-Qaeda back in March 2001 made specific reference to the group now operating in Syria with its hand on the tiller, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and it says here that it should be treated as an alternative name for the organisation, which is already prescribed under the name Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda, of course, being referred to by Starmer. And yet here we see the BBC, Jeremy Bowen alongside the rebranded leader Jelani, very much being promoted. Now, under, as referenced by Mike previously, under the Terrorism Act 2000, this really should constitute an offence because it is for the benefit of a prescribed organisation, which is very specifically prohibited by that piece of legislation. So Starmer's speech will have far-reaching ramifications, certainly in terms of legislative upheaval, censorship and surveillance, and it's therefore up to us to make sure that these changes are used as a means of exposing the government's agenda and the further extinction of liberty.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you very much for that. Now, if you like what the UK Column does, you would like to support us, please go to support.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us out there. We do need your ongoing financial support. You could make a donation or you could join as a member. And if you are a member, you get access to UK Column News Extra and other content. Pick up something from the UK Column shop if you would like to, and that helps us out greatly as well, as does picking up something from clivetocarl.com. We get a small commission on every sale made there. But if you can't do any of that, that's fine. But at least share material that you find from us on the website, whether it's UK Column News, articles, blogs, the links are there for you to use, and please do that. Now, on yesterday's interview, was entitled "Students Are Being Bullied into Submission" with Heather McKee, convener of Student Academics for Academic Freedom. So Heather McKee was speaking to Diane about the situation and the fact that I should mention that Student Academics for Academic Freedom is a subgroup of Academics for Academic Freedom. And they bring together students that feel that free speech and academic freedom are dying out in the UK, and they want to push back on this. So if you haven't seen that interview, please do have a look at it. Tomorrow at 1 p.m, we're putting out the premiere of An Introduction to China with Carl Zha. This is an interview that I did with Carl a couple of days ago. He is a fantastic guy, and I think it's time. We've been hearing lots of rhetoric about China from Trump and from Farage in recent months, and it's time to begin an adult conversation about China, about what it is and what it represents. And so join us at 1 o'clock for that tomorrow, if you possibly can. Okay, now we were talking about Stargate that being announced by Trump. Last week, we were talking about the fact that the UK government is pushing in exactly the same agenda direction with data centres to be built at all costs and so on. So let's just remind ourselves what was said in the little promo video that the government produced. We'll just play a short excerpt from this. This was from Wednesday's news last week.
We're entering a new era of AI. This tech has the potential to improve everyone's lives across our country and to grow the economy. But to do this, we need to invest in the UK's infrastructure and skills. So here are 5 recommendations from my AI Opportunities Action Plan. First, we're creating new AI growth zones. These will speed up the construction of AI data centers, huge warehouses full of computers that power services like AI and data processing. This will help create.
So that gives you a feeling of what they're talking about. Absolutely the same policy that we have seen from announced by Trump in the last day or two. Now, the government is now announced that it's launching a gov.uk digital wallet and app, which they claim is going to simplify access to services and documents. The document they chose to highlight for the greatness of this scheme was the digital driver's license. But as we mentioned a number of weeks ago, they're already talking about the veterans card being the first digital ID that they're going to add to this new system. They also announced reforms to public sector technology, and these two things combined, they claim, are going to save us all £45 billion and drive efficiency and growth. I don't believe a word of it. Now, last week, as we were saying, we highlighted the British government's AI agenda, and that involved dropping everything to build these new data centres and energy infrastructure. Of course, that is, as I say, exactly what Trump has announced as well. Yesterday's announcement of the new digital wallet goes hand in hand with the announcement on AI last week. Let's listen to their sales pitch on that.
The newly formed Digital Centre of Government is our vision for the future. We will deliver 5 changes for the British people. Easier lives. Next generation public services designed around the user to save you time. If the government knows your date of birth, it should know when you're old enough to apply for a provisional driving licence or state pension. Faster growth. If the government knows you're setting up a business, it should know what support you might be entitled to and prompt you about them. Firmer foundations. Digital public infrastructure and digital credentials will secure public services so they are trustworthy and resilient. Smarter organizations, tackling duplication and using AI to automate more things behind the scenes. Imagine if when you move house, you only have to tell the government once, and then all the relevant services are informed automatically. Higher productivity and efficiency, saving public money and enabling frontline workers to focus on delivery. This is a vision for everyone. We're putting new tech in people's pockets, slashing time wasted dealing with annoying processes so they can focus on what matters to them. Welcome to our modern digital government.
Are you excited about that?
Well, I'm not sure I am, but I can imagine a lot of hackers licking their lips because, of course, they say that there will be better access to data, but for whom, I think, has got to be one of the big questions.
Absolutely. Now, this is being pushed mainly by the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. And, well, just to demonstrate how identical this whole policy is to what Trump has announced, let's bring a tweet from them. This is from a few days ago, October the 6th. And of course, they're talking about faster diagnosis and personalized treatment of cancer. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. So we might have a discussion about that in extra. Now, let's move on then to national security.
Yeah, very, very much related to what I've been talking about earlier in relation to the Starmer update on terrorism, the willful conflation of several issues. But this has come from Dan Jarvis, the Minister for Security, and he has said in a tweet that hostile states are increasingly using security professionals in the UK to undermine our security. And he goes on to say that the right checks will help counter the threat and protect our national security. Now, is he necessarily speaking about this in response to an uptick in foreign interference, or is it simply to conform or indeed better coordinate the narrative in which we find ourselves, or at least many of us will find ourselves, trapped by offering dissenting voices towards the government? Nevertheless, he put this out on Monday of this week, and it's advice for security professionals in order that they tackle the threat from state actors. Of course, the inference, as I say, is that this is in response to an increase, though, that Jarvis does not actually substantiate that point at all, or even try to. But in his document, he says that work security professionals could take on to assist a foreign power in carrying out activities against the UK may include activity intended to sow discord, manipulate public discourse, discredit the political system, bias the development of policy, and otherwise undermine the safety or interests of the UK. Now, he also is putting the onus on the industry to report, and in particular to counter-terrorism policing. So asking individuals to suspect one another, something that we were asked to do back in 2020, and unfortunately an unhealthy number of people jumped at the chance to do so. Now, he uses phrases like intending to benefit a foreign power, but of course he doesn't explicitly say that there needs to be an identification of any link to such a foreign power. So it's easy to see already how this kind of legislation, which refers to the National Security Act 2023 is, of course, what it's all about. And as I say, it very much goes hand in glove with what will be the new terrorism policy and legislation, in that the authorities will be able to interpret any activity they choose as evidence of such an intent. Alongside this is a guide to the National Security Act 2023, which explains that the Act also covers activities intended to undermine our values and freedoms, that same phrase again, such as manipulating public discourse or threatening political dissidents in the UK, ranging from harassment to physical threats. Now, what I want to pick out of that is the reference to political dissidents, in that foreign political dissidents to regimes that are perceived to be hostile to the United Kingdom, for example, Russia, are protected, whereas, of course, the law is specifically designed and indeed being changed to capture political dissidents who are critical of the British regime from the inside. So quite the contradiction, not entirely unexpected. Now, since it's been used, the National Security Act has only been put into effect on a handful of occasions, but back in November, I reported on the case of 3 individuals charged with relation to a case of espionage or foreign interference from China via Hong Kong. Noteworthy because one of the defendants, Matthew Trickett, was found dead in a park in Maidenhead very shortly after that charge, a death which is still listed as being unexplained. The trial is to develop further in the coming months. But as I said at the outset, it seems very likely that the conflation of three previously separate areas will absolutely continue, those being national security, terrorism and extremism, all of which are being woven into one gigantic net, which may be cast over anyone that the state does not like.
Thank you, Charles. And just to finish then, we're going to talk about small farms now because sadly Vanessa has not been able to join. I've got to skip over a little bit of content here, so we will.
This really follows the work that we've been doing on farms for the last year and a half, and it's set in the context of everything that's on the UK column farm section or farming topic area, which I really would encourage you to go and look at. Now, we've heard lots of rumblings of various protests and dissatisfied farmers for a whole host of reasons, and very occasionally there's a sort of a chink of light where it's perceived that the farming community may have made a step forward in the right direction. So I'll refer back to the case of Amos Miller. Now, this is back over in the United States, something that's been going on for a long time. He's an Amish farmer and has had a battle in the court of Pennsylvania, specifically in this case to do with the sale of his raw milk, and this will strike a chord with anyone who's tried to purchase or indeed sell raw milk in the United Kingdom. Of course, it's prohibited by law in Scotland, and the narrative is very much that it's a harmful product and really should not be possible to purchase in this country. Now, anyone who might be of that mind, I would point towards the interview with the dairy farmer John Cook called Raw Truth, an absolutely phenomenal interview in which he goes through all the detail of not just the regulatory burden, but also the very many benefits of raw milk in the first place. I asked Patrick earlier about the executive order to expel undocumented workers. So again, related to this, we will look to the states to see how the way that migration is managed is going to affect the workforce, but specifically because, of course, like in the United Kingdom, it is run by large corporations. The only way in which to change this is to stop buying the food that they produce. Now, on a smaller scale, but nonetheless, I would say very relevant because of the message it sends. There was a recent intervention by Gloucestershire County Council suggesting to people that they buy oat milk rather than dairy milk. And this was on the basis that oat milk apparently produces fewer greenhouse gas emissions. Now, if we just put the science to one side, there was, of course, a hoo-ha, and the County Council have apologised. The point to be drawn out of this really is that whilst it was rejected by farmers, I would put it that effectively they walked into a trap by trying to argue the toss over the amount of emissions involved in dairy farming, rather than considering the principles of the very movement that is intending to shut them down. So the fallout from this is that there needs to be a greater examination of the climate narrative and the way it's wielded with which to destroy the small farm. Farmers, of course, repeatedly pulled down dead-end avenues, that being one of them. Recently, we saw much ado about the Bovaer feed additive, supposedly, which reduces methane emissions from cattle. But the point was that it might be harmful to humans or it might be harmful to the animal, rather than considering whether or not there was any need to reduce methane in the cow's digestive system in the first place. So the arguments really should be made, in my opinion, on fundamental principles rather than nitpicking over the detail of a particular point of policy. Now, the reason for putting it in those terms is that if you are aware of farmers that you think would be receptive to this sort of discussion, or you want to better educate yourself, I can point you towards the excellent presentation made by Sandy Adams and Roger Meacock, chaired by Debbie Evans, which is up on the UK Column website, and there'll be a part 2 following soon, which sets out the campaign to push small farmers off the land and charts the history of it going back through the decades. Now, to illustrate the point that I'm making really about all these policies being to the detriment of the environment and certainly the detriment of people and to the detriment of food security. One example is the suspension of capital grants by the Rural Payments Agency, and in particular that concerning hedge laying. Now, hedgerows occupy space that is not given over to the production of food on a large scale, but of course hedgerows can be used to produce food, and yet there are no capital payments available from the Rural Payments Agency for hedge laying, something that definitely does increase biodiversity and act as a massive species habitat, something that DEFRA of course say that they want to do but don't actually do. On Monday's news, Ben Rubin introduced the term POSIWID, which is an acronym for Purpose of System is What It Does. I can think of no better example than something like this with regard to agriculture. So it's the destruction of habitat, no biodiversity or food, but certainly plenty of money still available for taking larger areas of land out of food production. Now, and I'll just round off by the way in which the narrative is continually corrupted. And there's an exhibition about to start at Somerset House, which is called Soil, the World at Our Feet. And at first glance, one might think this is coming from the right direction. It opens tomorrow until mid-April, and it is an examination of how human health can be enhanced by good soil and the treatment of the soil. Of course, you scratch a little bit below the surface, no pun necessarily intended, and see that the exhibition itself is funded by the Gaia Art Foundation, among others. But you look again and you see that this Gaia fund receives money from several of the Rockefeller organizations. So I think you can see how it is that in actual fact, when they talk about soil and human health, what they really mean is that this is being subverted already to be specifically about climate change and indeed mankind not tinkering with the soil at all, in other words, not farming. So an effort to capture the genuine and holistic appreciation of soil's benefits to all of life and to move the focus into the arena of the climate narrative. So if you are in London, it might be an exhibition that you would go to just to see how far that narrative is being pushed. But that's all there's time for on that today.
And in fact, it's all there's time for on the news today. So Thank you very much, Charles. And thank you very much to Patrick Henningsen for joining us today. We'll be back in a few minutes for a little bit of extra if you are a UK column member. Otherwise, we'll see you on Friday. 1 p.m. But don't forget the interview at 1 p.m. tomorrow. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.